Today is the topic on protein. Last, we have seen about the carbohydrate as a nutrient source. Now we are seeing about the protein as a nutrient source. Okay. So next, so protein. So you know that after water, protein is the most plentiful substance in your body, and it is mainly required to maintain the growth and the to regeneration of your system. So particularly for the organs, for the strengthening of your organs as well as for the immune of your system is by your proteins. Once protein is digested, it is into its amino acids. So you will find most proteins are in your day-to-day life, whatever the food you take and the yummy food what you take. So most of the people will like the non-veg food, right? Particularly eggs, fish, meat, and milk. So whoever don't like the nuts and beans, they do like the eggs and fish and meat, right? So next, so it is a organic compound which contains carbohydrate, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sulfur. So most of our cell is 50% of your cell contain your dry weight of your proteins, and these proteins are made of chain of amino acids. That is your amino acids. It is made up of chain of amino acids. There are 20 amino acids in your body. Out of 20 amino acids, 9 are essential, and these essential amino acids make up your proteins. And others are 11 non-essential amino acids, which has been synthesized in your body, so which can make your essential amino acids. So required whenever your body requires these types of non-essential, it is synthesized by your system itself. So next, the main feature, we have already known that the protein is the long chain-like structure which is made up of small units of amino acids. So amino acids are linked together to form a chain of sequence. So that linkage is by your uh, peptide bonds. We know that carbohydrates are linked by uh, glycosidic bonds, whereas your proteins are linked by your peptide bonds. Okay. So you have the word which is derived from the Greek word proteus, which means a primary need or your which is in a lead. Okay. So that is your proteins. So proteins, which is essential for your for our cell, which is crucial and which is mainly playing a different role in our system, particularly enzymes, which is the main catalytic factor behind your metabolism. So after your water, protein is one of the main substance which is required by the systems. So which is for your organ function as well as for the immune systems of your bodies. Okay. So complete proteins. The complete proteins which is get taken from the meat, poultry, fish, dairy products, and eggs all provide the complete proteins. If you take these type of proteins, you don't need other proteins to be taken. So when you have a carbohydrates along with this that you can have this type of proteins. So you don't require other proteins. So our Indian foods are I think they are made up of the balanced diet. So we don't need the platter which is to be designed. We always have these types of balanced diet. So when we have a carbohydrate, that rice, then we'll have a meat with that. Then we have egg also with that. So when you have these types of, that time you will not have a sambar or any other type of green vegetables or anything. When you have meat with your rice, then you don't have these types of food. So when you have sambar and rice, then you will have egg with it, right? So this is the balanced diet. These our Indian always follow the good balanced diet. If we follow that properly and we don't do the sedentary work and we do our active works metabolically, then we'll have a proper healthy growth in our systems. So incomplete proteins like the nuts, fruits and vegetables. Therefore, these vegetables has to be paired with some essential amino acids for their daily diet. So the other one protein which is required by your skin and your hair and nail for the growth is your keratin. So that is the main thing. And if these types of protein which is taken too much also, it leads to some disorders. And because these proteins cannot, because I told you that protein cannot be stored as such. So they'll be breaking down to amino acids and peptides. So when they break down to amino acids, the final product will be your nitrogen component. So that should be removed as a urea cycle. Whereas these proteins cannot be stored. So proteins, when they store, they leads to dysfunctions of liver and kidney, because the liver and kidney is the final filtration mechanism of organ. Okay, so they are not able to get filter out the extra proteins. They will not be able to get rid of these extra proteins. Like other energy source, protein also leads for the weight gains. So whenever you go for the gym, they first recommend to take up the protein content for the building up of your body mass. Okay, so particularly egg, then the meat. Okay. So next, even the insects contain high levels of proteins than more of the normal proteins. So I told you that they are not stored in the body. So they are absorbed and so how they digest and absorb in your system. So protein, when they get digested in the stomach, they break down into peptides and amino acids. These peptides and amino acids are absorbed. From this absorbed amino acids, how they get absorbed. So part of protein is as a body proteins. So they need for the muscle, internal organs and bones. And they act as an enzymes for the metabolic process, and they act as a hormones. So for the peptides is the main regulator for the hormones. Antibodies. So antibodies are the defense mechanism of your proteins. So next is they also involved in the other regulatory mechanisms of fatty acid metabolism and also in the glucose metabolism. And finally, your nitrogens. So nitrogens are removed by a urea cycles, and they provide energy as well as the final product of your ammonia, that is your nitrogen content, which is removed by your urea cycle. This is how the protein, whenever the protein you take, the digestion mechanism takes place. Okay. This is the process, or this is the mechanism which is taking place in your system. Right. Next, so classification. So based on the protein can be classified based on the structure and based on the biological function as well as by a composition. So based on structure. So the first is the primary structure. The basic primary structure of protein is relatively simple and consists of one or more linear chains of amino acids. So they have the indication of protein numbers. So indicates a number of amino acids and the sequence which is formed by the polypeptide chains. So they will have a alpha hydroxy carbonyl group, a carboxyl group, and a alpha amino group. So which is adjacent. So they will have one or more polypeptide chains on it. So this is the main of your protein structures. Next is your secondary structure. So this like first you are learning the alphabets. So it forms a single of amino acids. It is the alphabet which is formed. Next is you're preparing a word. That is your secondary structure. So in secondary structure, you have different types of structures like alpha helical structure, beta pleated sheets, and other structures. So then is your tertiary structure. So tertiary structure is like forming a sentence. So that is the tertiary structure, which is formed by the uh, together of your all different types of your secondary structure, and the primary structure is your tertiary structures. Based upon the tertiary structure, proteins are divided into globular and fibrous types. So fibrous proteins have elongated rope-like structure, and they will have a strong and hydrophobic and usually consist of many single type of secondary structure. and they also provide support and shade to external protection to vertebrates. And particular fibrous protein, for example, is your keratin is a fibrous protein. The globular protein is often your uh, several types of secondary structure and are most spherical and hydrophilic in nature. The most globular proteins act as a enzymes, regulatory proteins, particularly globular proteins. And finally, your quaternary structure is um, three-dimensional arrangement of your protein subunits which contains two or more identical or different polypeptide chains or subunits in your quaternary structures. These subunits are held together by a different forces like non-covalence, hydrophobic force, hydrophilic forces. They form a they undergo conformational change uh, based on the biological activity. Biological activity. These are the main functional proteins. Next is your biological functions. Biological functions of protein is your uh, depending upon proteins have various functions, and based on their chemical reactions and based on their functional properties, uh, depending upon your system and they work. Okay, so you have a different functional process of your proteins. First is your enzymatic proteins. So proteins, you generally know that it acts as an enzymes, right? So enzymes for the most varied and highly specialized proteins are your catalytic activity of enzymes. Enzymes catalyze a variety of reactions. Structural proteins. These proteins which aid in strengthening or providing protecting a biological structures. For example, keratin. Next is your transport protein. The most common example is your hemoglobin, which carries your oxygen to your system. Next is nutrient and storage proteins. So I told you that proteins will not be stored. Proteins store ions. They store ions. So they help to store the protein ions in your systems. So and mainly they provide nutrition for your embryos. Contractile and motile proteins. The most example is your actin and myosin, which is the main protein which is involved in your muscle movement. So these are the fibril proteins which is present in your muscle, which helps in the contraction and relaxation of your muscles. Next is your defense proteins. You generally know that immunoglobulin is your defensing mechanism of proteins. Regulatory proteins. So nothing but which regulates your hormones. So hormones is a main regulator. Okay. So mainly, your, for example, the most common example is your insulin. So when it is in highly regulator or decreased regulator, both condition leads to some disorders. So it has to be maintained. The regulation should be properly maintained. Okay. So next is toxic proteins. You know that these proteins hydrolyze or degrade enzymes. These proteins are generally needed, but some toxic proteins are useful for the treatment purpose. So in that, most example is your uh, snake venom, which acts as an antidote for that same poison. So it is an antidote. And next is your classification based on the composition. You have two different compositions, simple protein and conjugated protein. In simple protein, they hydrolyze, they only yield amino acid, they don't release any other organic or inorganic compounds when they hydrolyze. So particularly egg, serum, wheat, rice, which have their amino acids only. So they don't hydrolyze other organic compounds. Conjugated proteins, they when they hydrolyze, they yield not only the amino acid, they also yield other organic or inorganic components because they also contain the non-amino acid parts, that is the prosthetic group, which is an additional group. Sometimes a amino group may be attached, sometimes a phosphorus group may attach. It may be depends. Okay, sometimes the sulfur group may attached. So these are the additional groups. So that is the prosthetic groups. So plant source of proteins and animals. So these are the sources which is required for the protein. So we get tuna. Tuna is nothing but that Kudravali rice. some millet, one type of millet which provides protein, and tofu, that is a soy paneer, and beans, legumes, your cardamom, and your soybeans, nuts, lentils, your rolled oats, milk, soy milk, chia seeds. So nowadays it is also commonly known chia seeds and nuts, pumpkin seeds, because everyone concentrate on their health right nowadays, and for the particularly for the hair growth and everything, so they concentrate these types of foods now. And I know that animal source, you generally take all the fishes, right? Eggs. So sardines is nothing but your matti meal, the fish which is taken matti meal, that is your sardine fish. So function of proteins, they involved in the growth and maintenance, and for the body tissues and muscle tissues, and which is the main causes of your biochemical reaction, that is your enzymes. Enzymes are your biochemically involved uh, component, which also act as a messengers, that is your hormones, which carries a message from one center to the other center, so which gives an information. So when you trigger out the hormone of steroid hormones, they build up the mass. When you trigger out the growth hormones, they provide the growth to your body, and they also involve in the maintenance of proper pH. Body fluids has to be maintained properly. If the body fluids are not maintained properly, it leads to some disinfection. Balances fluids. So particularly sodium, potassium, pump maintenance, iron maintenance, and it is involved in the strengthening of your immune health. And that is your antibodies. Transport and stores the nutrients. We have already studied now, and it also provides energy. So the main RD of your protein is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. This amount to 56 grams per day for average sedentary man and 46 grams per day for the average sedentary woman is a common thing. So deficiency and excess of proteins. When you take a deficiency of protein or excess of proteins, both leads to a disease. A common example is your protein energy malnutrition. You would have learned about the world most widespread disease called malnutrition problem is your marasmus and kwashiorkor. When you take extreme food energy deficiency is your marasmus. When you take extreme protein deficiency, it is a kwashiorkor. So both overlap and most of the time, and together called as a protein energy malnutrition. So during the hunger, you leads to the progressive discomfort, illness, and pain resulting to the lack of. So these are physiological things. So overconsumption of protein-rich food can also make your risk for health possibilities like heart disease, homocysteine, kidney disease. Homocysteine is during your um, diabetics condition, high diabetics condition. The cysteine may be present in your urines. So kidney disease, adult bone loss, cancers. These are the deficient excess of proteins. So these about your proteins as nutrients. Okay, thank you. And we'll have the discussion related to lipids in the next class.